Welcome to Simply Caroline, a podcast dedicated to women empowerment where we will discuss a bunch of different subjects such as life, parenting, love, business, money, relationships, healing, recovery, addiction, entrepreneurship, and so much more. A podcast I'll do my best to keep simple, fun, and relatable and bring you tools to help you better your life. So thank you for being here. And here's your host, myself, Caroline Blanchard. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for being with us again this week. I have a special guest, Laurel Solé. How are you?
Hi, good. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. I love your last name. It's like very exotic.
Hey, I wish I knew where in the lineage it came from, but it just trickled down. So yeah,
Oh,
thank you.
well, now you have it. So enjoy it. So today
Exactly.
we're going to talk about healing after trauma. Trauma can be done in various ways, and I'm not going to be the one explaining it. I'm going to let Laurel explain it. But basically, Laurel, you're a psychotherapist.
Yeah, I'm a psychotherapist and a relationship coach.
Okay. And how did you get there? What was your, I know that's a loaded question, but what was
No,
your,
yeah, I mean, how did I get here? I kind of found my way essentially through my own desire to heal what I call like a biography of trauma.
hmm,
Um, And I was in graduate school getting my master's in social work, and I did that and got my master's in social work and worked as a social worker for a long time. And then I went through a very traumatic breakup where there was an unintended pregnancy, and I kept the child. And he fought for custody, and she was very young and she was still nursing, and so going through that trauma of potentially having to separate from my still nursing child in custody, potential custody arrangements was kind of put me over the edge, and I just found my own need to enter into psychotherapy. And then after working as a social worker, I got my clinical psychotherapy license. And that's how I found myself doing psychotherapy. And then what I really realized can be the most traumatizing in our lives is relationship. Relationship can actually be one of the biggest burdens of challenging experiences and trauma. Whether it's a toxic relationship that goes on for a long time, whether it's a relationship we want but somebody doesn't want, whether it's being rejected, left, abandoned, infidelity, whether that's with a person or financially, it's just whether that's with our mothers, our fathers, our siblings. Relationship just can bring with it so many traumatic experiences. So that's when I did the relational coaching work and now interweave the psychotherapy and the relationship coaching work.
yes. And you know what? Hearing your answer here, you make me realize, yes, relationships are the hardest thing in life. And because when we think relationship, we think the loved ones, but there's so many different type of relationship. Talk to me about, where did your trauma begin and when did you start healing?
Mm. So I really say that my trauma began at point of conception. My mother's conception with me, and I say that because I was the product of an affair, and
Mm,
just my existence, and my mother's choice to keep me, and not abort me, which she actually did try. But just my existence into this world because it was an affair, caused my father and his relationship he was in and their whole years down the road, so much tension. So I was this like little, helpless fetus, but I had already been born into relational circumstances that were causing people trauma. So that I say was my first sort of inherited experience with it. Something I didn't even choose, or maybe on a esoteric spiritual way I did, if we want to go there. But yeah, so that would be the answer to my first traumatic
yeah, and I'll
experience.
stop you there 2 seconds because I find that so interesting. not everyone is open to realizing that, as conception, we are a being, and then
Mhm.
everything starts affecting you at that point. I realized that when I did NLP and I was in my 40s.
Yeah.
But when did you discover that? Was it later in your life, or it's something that you felt and knew as a child?
No, I think probably I did feel and know it as a child. I think you're right in kind of asking that, but I don't think it was conscious. I think that when it became conscious was it was probably about 5 years ago when all the therapy work and all the coaching work, and I was like, but I'm not getting to it. Something is missing here. And even being EMDR trained and working, with my own clients, bringing them all the way back to the point of conception, it was like for some reason I wasn't connecting that within myself, and neither were the therapists that I was working with. But it was just a light bulb moment, really. I think I was doing I'm certified in compassionate inquiry, which is Gabor Mate's um,
Mm,
psychotherapeutic approach. And it was during my training in that where it just was like, oh, it's conception. That's it. That was the moment. So yeah, yeah. So it was
no,
later. It was later.
yeah, I'm asking you that because it's funny. I grew up knowing I was the reconciliation baby. So,
Mm,
and my parents still divorced when I was 9 months old. So clearly I failed my mission. But
yeah.
I always laughed at that, saying this, like I was a reconciliation baby and that was my first fail. It didn't work. But it took me a long time to understand that my feeling of abandonment and my feeling of not belonging
Mm-hmm.
came from there, because I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't wanted all around, and
Yeah.
I just heard you say my mom even tried to abort, and that must be devastating on some levels.
Mm-hmm.
When I guess it's unconscious at some point, but when you realize it now, how do you feel about that as an adult?
Well, similar to you, I do identify that as being the root cause of a lot of suffering in my life around failure, around rejection, around abandonment, around not being wanted. Because the first response upon, finding out she's pregnant is, I don't want this, right? So it's that immediate rejection. So I do internalize, and I've had to work through a lot of that in my life. And it's interesting as you're talking, because it's so, we have our own internal reflections of things. And as you share your story, I'm like, but actually, it was your parents' failure. You were a success because you grew into this healthy, highly functioning little baby that you were supposed to be. You're the perfect success. You were perfection. It's
Yeah.
a reflection of their failure.
Yeah, and you're right, but it just took me a while to get there. So,
Yeah.
how do you help people? Because, we're talking about it, and you seem to be using humor a bit like me to to get out of
Mhm.
those situations. And sometimes people are like not understanding that some things will hurt me just
Mhm.
because I laugh about it, but might as well laugh about stuff, because when it's there, it's there. But how do you help people? um how can I say that, really solve something that is not even in their doing,
Mhm.
unless you believe in the fact that you are choosing your parents.
Mhm.
But
Right.
regardless, like, these are things that happened at conception and as babies, so we had no power over that. And
Mhm.
I know that for myself, it's still work in progress. How do you help people
Mhm.
get through that? Because that feeling of rejection and that feeling of failure is profoundly um
Mhm.
ingrained.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think if it's somebody that does have that inclination towards this spiritualized or more esoteric perspective, the conversation can be different. But generally speaking, whether or not you hold that within your belief system, I think one perspective is that overcoming struggle is the opportunity to master, and become this sort of, to develop self mastery over your life here while you're here. that every struggle is an opportunity to develop that sense of inner discipline around overcoming or doing something hard, and that every single struggle is going to present a different challenge. And it's in honing the skill of overcoming that. And I think it really is. It's like sometimes I think of Tai Chi, or I think of Qigong, or I think of even yoga, that with precision and intention and learning to hold a certain stance in your life to what trauma is, to how it affects you, to challenge, that when we create this inner discipline and this mastery over that, that's us overcoming, right? Literally coming over, getting over it, rather than us sort of feeling like it's bigger than us and we're like shrinking and drowning in it. So that's sort of the larger conversation I have with my clients, is see this. Yes, it's hard. None of this is taking that experience away. What it is what's in the hard. What within yourself can you develop and strengthen? What trait, what faculty, what character within yourself can you strengthen even more to overcome this current difficulty?
Yeah, because we're talking about, I guess we picked one example that we didn't know we had kind of in common a bit, but although I find yours more traumatic, but that applies to all traumas. So, we can talk about abuse that happens when quite often people are younger. And again, it's going to instill shame and, so many different feelings that should not be there. But the result is the same as an adult. You're dealing with something that you don't even know how to deal because it's like ingrained in you,
Yeah.
or you choose to move on from something without addressing it. So again, I'm going to ask you, how do you help adults to really get there, first of all? Because a lot of people I hear, they don't even realize, sometimes they're telling you their story and you're like, oh my gosh, this is your issue, and they don't see it,
Yeah. So one of the definitions of trauma, and this is why we say it's relative, is that trauma is less about the thing that happened or the person that happened, and more how we are rearranged within ourselves as a result of that person or thing. And this most basic example I can give, I think, is if you're in a car accident and you're rear-ended by somebody, let's say. And that might not be traumatizing for somebody, but for somebody else, that could be traumatizing. And so we wouldn't say it is traumatizing or it isn't traumatizing. We'd look at the individual and we'd say, so how did things shift for you after that moment then? You're here talking to me about this, and you're saying it's traumatizing. What did you notice shifted within yourself in your world? And let's say, using the same example, they say, I can't drive down that road anymore without having a panic attack. Okay, well, then we're going to work with the feelings of panic attack, and we're going to take that head on. So we'd apply maybe some EMDR, maybe some breath work, maybe some, NLP work around, or maybe some cognitive behavioral work. Or let's say they say, I can't stop looking in my rearview mirror. Every time I stop at a red light, I'm so afraid that somebody's going to rear end me again. So then we would, and I'm paralyzed in the car. So we really are looking for the words they're using to describe their new experience. I'm panicking. I'm paralyzed. I'm fearful. And then we address that. Let's look at what paralysis is like in your body. Where else do you feel that in your life? Where else have you felt that in your life? What's your earliest memory of feeling that fear and that panic and that paralysis? And so then we would work through those memories, doing trauma processing or cognitive behavioral therapy, or really looking at what neurobiology is and how to rewire the neurobiological response. Lots of nervous system regulation. Okay, did I answer the question? Just want to make
Yes,
sure.
yes, I'm just listening because you're interesting. So I can let you go on.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
this is a subject that I love to learn about. And I like the fact that you mentioned, trauma is relative. And I
Mhm.
think that that explains, anyway, it just, a light bulb went on for me in relationships when something will happen and one person completely loses it and the other one is like, I don't understand. It wasn't a big deal. And you're
Exactly.
like, it was. But that comes from the fact that, you know, you live your emotions differently. It depends where it comes from.
That's
So,
absolutely right.
so
Yeah.
you just confirmed that I'm not crazy. Sometimes I
Mhm.
just had bad reactions.
Yeah, or completely see, this is the other thing too, I think is helpful to remember is no, none of us are crazy. And even we could go as far as to say none of our reactions are bad. They're all
Mm,
serving a purpose. We wouldn't have that reaction if that reaction didn't actually serve some kind of a purpose. Now, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily like healthy or productive or even helpful, but it served a purpose. So if every time I feel misunderstood in relationship, I get angry, well, my anger served a purpose for me at some point in time. So
mm.
it's not necessarily bad. It really might not be helpful. It might be counterproductive. But so that's another part of working with people around trauma resolution and trauma processing and healing is really to normalize and understand that there are no bad reactions. Every single one of them served a purpose at some point in time. It just might mean that we need to like open the tool chest or tool belt or whatever it is, and clean it out. Really look at what is the most helpful here and what can we start to sort through and look at maybe what we're holding on to that we don't need anymore, but do it compassionately.
So how do explain that when you say, you know, for people who are not getting
Mhm.
it,
Mhm,
do it
yeah.
compassionately.
Yeah, what is it? So the first part of doing any work compassionately is not judging ourselves. So I'll go back because to the anger one. So let's say when I feel misunderstood, and let's not say like I actually do get angry when I feel misunderstood. It's a really infuriating experience for me. Now my anger has really served a purpose for me in the past. It's kept me safe in many instances. It's gotten my point across when I'm fumbling for words. It's really served me at certain points. And it sort of brought me out of a people pleasing passive states of being sometimes and gotten the job done. Um, so, but if it's getting in the way of relationship, and then what we can say is the compassionate piece is that I would never judge it. I would look at why I maybe had developed that as a coping mechanism or as a helpful response to certain situations. What is it serving? What role is it serving? So I really view it as a part of myself. I am not anger, but there is a part of me that gets angry. And I view that as a helpful friend that I needed to have compassion for and see how she really does serve a purpose. And so I look at her non judgmentally and compassionately. And then I try to understand where and why I might have created that behavior mechanism within myself. It usually always starts as children. So then I'd go back to this angry little girl that felt rejected and abandoned. And as my adult self, I'd really sit with her. And I'd probably do for her what nobody's ever done for most of us, sit there and say, I get it. And in every single way, any of us would have been angry in this situation. You had every right to feel angry, but as a child, you couldn't. There's a lot of risk in being angry with our parents. We get disciplined, there's consequences, some of us get hit, you can't. So we hide it, we shove it, we eat it down as children. But then later in life, when we're not at the risk of being punished and neglected and maybe abused for our anger, it starts to come out. And so that would be one of the ways that we would deal in a compassionate way with our parts of ourself that are coming forward that aren't really all that productive, but are still there and need to be looked at.
Yeah, and I love how you say, you know, don't judge. Um, because quite often we will be judged and we let people judge us and we borrow it. So let's say, you know, align with your example, we will be like, I'm an angry person. And
Mhm.
it's just like anger is a part of you, but it's not you, who you are,
Right.
which is, you know, I think that separating those two things is also very helpful. So,
Mhm.
Laurel, talk to me about what's the difference between EMDR and NLP. And, you know, I know what cognitive behavioral therapy is,
Mhm.
but really, how do you pick and choose which one you will use? Because I've heard a lot about
Mhm.
EMDR and
Mhm.
no, well, all of them, but can you help us, like,
Mhm.
just guide us through those different kind of
Yeah,
therapies?
yeah, for sure. So EMDR is very specifically using the brain, and it's using what's called bilateral stimulation of the brain. There's many ways you can bilaterally stimulate the brain, but essentially you need something that's going right, left, right, left. So some people will wear headphones and there'll be a sound that alternates right, left, right, left. Some people will use a light bar, so their eyes are crossing across the midline, right, left, right, left. Now that we're all doing everything digitally and
Mhm.
online, I just do it over, I'll use my actual finger to go right, right, left. And then there's other now more advanced online ways that you can do it. Um, and the way that it originally was developed was using this finger and going with your eyes, following my finger back and forth. So what happens with trauma is that when we go through a traumatic experience, um, we still need to wake up and take care of our children, go to the post office and get to the grocery store and drive the cart. We can't be long lasting in our trauma responses. Um, we just have to live life, many of us. And so the brain kind of takes that. You could say it encapsulates it or it keeps it safe, usually like in the limbic system, in the what we call like the emotional part of the brain. And so, but then if we get a trigger response, if we get a trigger, we may respond really big because it's been all cozy and encapsulated there, but then it like gets broken open for a minute. It hasn't been processed or integrated until we'll
Mm.
have a big response to something. So the bilateral stimulation, you have the client think of the trauma response, and I'm being really brief here. So
Mm.
think of the way it made them feel, and then you bilaterally stimulate the brain. And what that does is it allows for integration. It allows for the brain to think and feel about the trauma using many more aspects of the brain rather than just the one emotional response part of the brain. Um, yeah, does that make sense? Did I?
Very well explained. Thank you. What
Okay.
about NLP?
Yeah, so I'm not certified in NLP. You might be a better person to compare the NLP approach to that. I just am familiar with it from my various other trainings. Um, but from what I understand with NLP and a little bit that I'm familiar with, is it's sort of like reprogramming our response. So, in the moment when you feel something, you might pick a word, and then that word is sort of like hijacking or short circuiting your typical neural pathway response. So if let's see, think of an example. If I am really angry not angry, if I'm frustrated with my children that they're not getting out of the house in time, I might have a word I say to myself, like cat. And then it's a way of sort of short circuiting the response I'm currently in. It's yeah, jumping over that normal wagon wheel track that I've been in, that's my default, that's my familiar, and instead I'm like cat, and in that moment I create an interruption. Does that make sense?
It does. And thank
Yeah,
you. And
yeah.
thank you for explaining all of that. I think that, first of all, when we go through trauma, or let's just say when we decide to get better, when we make the decision, it's hard to find the right therapist, it's hard to find the right method, and then a lot of us will go into the Google rabbit hole of where should I go, what should I do, and clearly what we don't consider at that point is that every article is written by the proponent of that method, so it's always the
Mhm,
best thing you should do is this. But thank you for explaining. And
mhm,
what I love about you is that you do offer therapy and you do offer healing after trauma, but that's because you're so familiar with it. So talk to us a little bit about that, because I stopped you after the
mhm.
your baby, you said it started at conception, But ironically, I like how you said you have a biography of trauma, just because I find the title interesting, but it's also very sad. But I want you to really, dive a little bit into that to show people that it's possible. There's life after trauma, and
Yeah.
healing is possible. Because I remember me, at some point in my life, I was just like, well, no, this is life. That's how it
Yeah.
feels, and
Yeah.
there's just not something after.
Yeah.
You kind of like get complacent in your situation and be like, okay, I'll deal with it this way. But
Yeah.
there is something after. So please
Yeah.
enlighten us.
Sure. Do you think your listeners want to hear the actual traumas that I've been through, or just to
Well,
confirm that
I'll
life
let
has?
you decide that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that sometimes like it helps people relate,
No.
but
Okay.
I don't want to bring you somewhere you don't want to.
Oh no, no, I'm comfortable talking about all of it. But yeah, so I mean the conception piece I've shared. Then when my mother decided to keep me, she left the UK where she got pregnant and went back to the States. My father wasn't interested in me at all. So grew up with a single mom, had a younger brother that she had from a different man, in and out of marriages. We moved almost every year of my life, just me and her and my brother, everywhere in the States, every 1 to 2 years. I went through childhood sexual abuse from one of my stepfathers. Um, and let's see, carrying on, tried to tried to meet my father at 17. Again, didn't really want to have anything to do there. He had married the woman he had been in relationship with and had 2 children later. Um, there was a rape in college where I did end up getting pregnant and had an abortion. Um, then my brother drowned about 5 years ago or so, and he was the sibling that I grew up with.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, so there's more in there, but I'll kind of leave it at that, just to give people the idea that, like, we literally can go through hell, and somehow, like, healing is real. Like, I actually feel like on some level that we are here to heal. That's like the purpose of this lifetime. And that in that way, I see every one of those experiences as like an opportunity. And I don't mean in any way to like dismiss what I went through, but I see it as an opportunity to grow a part of myself that can tolerate discomfort, and finesse my capacity to still love, and to still care, and to still be kind. And it didn't have to make me a hard person, and it didn't have to make me a resentful or bitter person. And I think that's the whole point, is to what degree can you still love? Like, that's healing, I think, is to what degree can we still love ourselves and the people in it? And I need to say one more thing about that. And to what degree can we learn to hold boundary for ourselves? Because I really think that an aspect of self-love that women don't talk about enough is boundary. Like, that is sometimes one of the greatest forms of self-care and self-love. And I
Yeah,
think it's,
and
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
so sorry.
No,
Keep
no, no,
going.
go ahead. Oh, I was
I
just going to
was
say,
going to say, like, when you talk about boundaries,
mm-hmm,
for me, it used to be always thinking about relationships, well,
mm-hmm,
your loved one, your whatever partner,
yeah,
that, oh, I need boundaries and blah, blah. But it goes well beyond that. And, recently I discovered, even with your kids, especially when they become adults,
mm-hmm,
you need to know what boundaries are on your side and on their side, you know?
yeah, yeah,
So it's not just about
mm-hmm,
love relationships.
no,
Boundaries are so crucial.
mm-hmm, yeah. And then one other thing I want to say about healing, the work that I do as well, is working with women to really be in their body, to listen to their body. Because I also think, and this relates to boundary, and let me just say why. Because let's say I get a phone call to work with somebody, And I say yes. And immediately I feel this like tension in my throat.
Mm.
That's a way of my body communicating to me, not necessarily that I don't want to work with that person, but I might be too busy. It might be at the wrong time. It might feel a little out of my comfort zone. Something's communicating to me that there needs to be pause and some introspection. So I think part of boundary is really learning to listen to the body. And that's what the sexual violations and the sexual assault really gave me the opportunity to do, was to really hone the skill of listening to how my body is communicating to me around discomfort in the presence of other people.
I find that I don't even know which word to put there, but it's crazy that you are turning that into, something positive came out of it.
Mm.
Because me, I know that, if I'm thinking about my daughters, because
Mhm.
let's face it, it happens more to women. Like
Mhm.
I was so afraid that it would happen to them when they were young, because I was just like, their life will be
Mhm.
over. That's it. No chance. So I really need to protect that and protect that. And I was obsessed about, protecting. But you can survive that. And not that I'm saying it's okay if it happens, it's just that
Mhm.
there's a life after. And I find it amazing that you're able to pinpoint what
Mhm.
positivity it gave you, because
Mhm.
that's usually not how we hear. Like when we listen about abuse, that's not what we hear usually. um and the thing that I want you to, that I would like you to speak about is also, when I hear you talking about your things, the real definition of healing is that you don't feel like crying anymore when you're talking about that. It's like you're telling a story that
Mhm.
happened, but your emotion is like, talk to us about that a little.
Yeah, you make such a good point. I'm really glad you brought that up, because that is how we, as clinicians, really watch to see the healing progression in the clients. Is it sounding like they're reading a really sad or disappointing or upsetting article in a newsletter or a blog or the newspaper or a magazine? And they can put it down and be like, wow, I just read this really interesting story with a lot of like things that happened in it. Or are they crying and needing a tissue and distraught by it, and it stays with them, and they go have lunch with their friend after and they're in tears and they're like, I can't, this story I read. And it's like, so if they're in that space within their own biography, we know that there's still that healing to do, and that so much of healing is this, that we find the seat of the observer in our own life and in the events that happen to us, that we're not consumed by them anymore. We're able to watch them as memories, or we're able to observe them as feelings, but we're not wrapped and folded into it anymore in a way that we can't separate ourselves from it.
It's beautiful and it's
Mhm.
powerful.
Mhm.
um yes, and for me, that's when I realized, that there's some things that, because I went, you go through some process, and at some point you're like, well, am I better or not? Because you're going through the process. It's like losing weight. If you look at yourself
Yeah.
every single day in the mirror, you don't see
Mhm.
exactly what happens, but someone that will see you a year after, they'll be like, oh my gosh. So it's a bit of the same thing with the healing. But for me, it was another light bulb moment, was like when I was able to just tell a story, and I was just like, it's almost like it didn't happen to me. I'm just relating the story of,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
It's like,
yeah. And my last question to you, because I would keep you all day. Honestly, you're so interesting and intelligent, and you're teaching us a lot here. But I know that you had big traumas in your relationships as well. And now I believe that you are happy
mhm.
in a relationship. So how do you, because for me, that too is like, there's light at the end of the tunnel. There's a life after heartbreak and relationships. Because some of us, will go through ugly divorces, or not even ugly, just a
Mhm.
separation, and
Mhm.
be like, that's it. I'm staying single forever. You
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
it's difficult to trust and love again. And that's what I like that, you're sharing, is that you stay loving. You stayed
Mhm.
loving. and you kept
Yeah.
that love with you, and you had all the opportunities in life to decide that life was against you.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it wasn't easy. I mean, I want your listeners to know that it's been a long journey to get,
Yeah.
it's not like I just picked myself up, dusted myself off. But no, I do think that with ongoing support and just a continued investment, I guess is the right way to say it, in personal growth and personal development, the more that we can become experts on ourselves and understand our own functioning, the better that we can be at relationships. So I am remarried, and I've got 3 daughters in total. So I have 2 daughters from him. Um, and it's not been easy, but it's successful. And what's made it successful is my willingness to remain 100% committed to my personal growth, and his willingness to also be aware of how I'm growing and what I want our relationship to grow into, and his commitment to personal growth as well, which came later. But now we do have a standing bi-monthly session with our therapist person. And it's the support we need. It's like you can't build a house on no foundation. Eventually it crumbles. So you've got to always be maintaining that foundation of your relationship. Yeah. But I guess what I want to say is it's work, but that doesn't mean it can't be successful.
Well, I love that you kept your belief through it all. You kept your, because I find that that's one big thing that can die with trauma. It's like the
Mhm.
hope and the belief that there's something after, so you stay
Mhm.
stuck in it. So congratulations for doing that. And I like also that you said you have a bi-monthly session
Mhm.
pre-planned. You don't
Yeah.
need to be in a crisis in a
Mhm.
couple to actually
That's
go and see someone. And I'm talking about a couple here, but it's the same thing as, like, I remember first time I went to therapy, I was probably 18 or 19 or something like that. And I went to 2 sessions and I stopped because I was just
Mhm.
like, no, I'm not crazy. I'm not
Mhm.
crazy. Because it was really, that's like 30 years ago. It was associated to, you had to be crazy, um, you know, close to the point of being internalized
Mhm.
to actually go see a therapist, because
Mhm.
otherwise you had to be strong and do it yourself. But now I truly feel like everyone should have a therapist, because it's just a good sounding board of, getting everything out there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
do you have a book, Laurel?
No, I'm writing one currently, but it's not, yeah, it'll be a while before
Yeah,
it's out. But yeah, I am in the process.
yeah, because I'm thinking there's clearly a book.
Mhm.
Like, and when it's out, I will, re-invite you, because I want to read that book. There's so much wisdom and history and all of that as well. But where can people reach you?
Yeah, I mean, the best place to reach me is you can find me on Facebook. I have a private Facebook group. It's Divorce Healing Circle. Or you can just go to my website. It's my full name, so laurelsolé.com. And just you can see my services there and get a little bit more feel of who I am. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being so open with us and teaching us a bunch of things today. I appreciate that you came on. And to everyone who was here this week, thank you so much. I wish you a beautiful week, and go visit Laurel's website.
Thank you so much. Nice to chat.